Welcome, Ms. Dymoke. Nice to have you as a guest for the new episode of the Life That Said Yes podcast. And thank you for sharing your time with us. How are you feeling?
Hello, very nice to meet you too, Ivan. So my name's Katy Dymoke, and I'm feeling kind of a little bit excited to how this is going to unfold, and curious about it. It's always interesting to speak about experiential learning, something like body mind centering or practices that I've been involved in for a long time. It's always interesting to find out ways of talking about it because it's not straightforward. So thank you for your initiative. I think it's very welcome.
There is one question that has just popped in my mind a couple of minutes ago. You mentioned that you have an ongoing session before this, and I know you've been working individually with people for years now. And as a therapist and a body worker, and do you have any special procedure? How do you prepare for an individual session, and also after the session? Any ways of taking care of yourself and also preparing to approach a client?
Well, I don't think there's one way, actually. I think it very much depends on the context or the nature of the work and the nature of the client. So some or group of people. So I don't just work one-to-one. I work pedagogically, teaching, as well as psychotherapeutically. So I think there's a whole range there of relational context. And but I think the connecting factor to all of them is a kind of like attuning to a very deep listening process in myself, where I talk a lot about membranes in my writing and stuff, so that I have to feel available, therefore that I'm not shut myself off in a cocoon where I'm then kind of quite rigid with my boundary or whatever that might, my sense of receptivity to other. So I think I'm just very comfortable in myself now when I'm working in my working relationship, because I feel the more at ease I am, the more at ease the session will be, and therefore hopefully the more rewarding. But again, that's a generalization, because there are some situations where I have to be very bounded, if you like, and very contained in myself. So it does vary. I don't think there's one way of doing this, but more generally, there has to be a sense of ease and confidence, and but not confidence that's kind of an imposing kind of confidence, but just general ease and availability to listen, but also to notice when there's a bit of a transgression or something uncomfortable coming around, which has to be dealt with more sensitively. And I might move a bit, I might breathe, sometimes people call it zero balancing. Just before a session, I'll do something very practical. Washing my hands, wash my face, do some washing up in the kitchen, just spend 15 minutes doing something very basic. So that, just to not be anticipating in my mind or preparing too much mentally. So, but thank you for asking that. It's an interesting one. And finishing afterwards, it's a similar thing. Get up, say goodbye, the letting go process, making sure people check out in a good way, that they're good to go, that we've finished the session off well. And then it gives a sense of ease again.
Right.
It doesn't help to hold on to things. You have to know when to let go, let the process continue in its own time and own space.
Right. Would you say that after a session, there's also a period where there is a need to kind of like sense your own field and in a way evaluate if there were some leftovers from the session, either energetically or mentally or in any kind of.
Yeah, I think I do trust my body memory, my somatic, my memory, my bodily memory, my bodily sense of things, and very often it's not instant. It's not doesn't come straight away. Sometimes it's a couple of hours later where I go, oh, light bulb moment, insight. I'll just make a note. And then sometimes, you could be going for a walk in the park or, talking to a relative or a close friend or something. And then again, another insight comes because they happen to speak about something that they're experiencing, or good or bad. And it goes, oh, it sheds a light on something. Of course, you'd never talk about it, but it's just another way of processing and being insightful and being responsible as a practitioner, allowing yourself to be affected by things, but in a way that's healthy, so that it keeps moving and it keeps being supportive.
Right.
And yeah, the aspect of enabling change, enabling something to change, means that there has to be space for movement.
Mm-hmm.
My own somatic practices are very important. Going for a walk is great. Putting on some music, moving around a little bit. But as I say, there's no one singular way. Sometimes it's get a cup of tea, sit down, watch some telly.
Exactly. Yeah. The simplicity.
Yeah, I think we can be rigorous about things, and some people do want routines. But because my practice is so variable, so varied, I have supervisees as well as clients, and I have different ages, and then related sometimes couples or sometimes mums and infants. So, each one is different. So it doesn't help to have a singular way of being with it.
Exactly. And related to this, that there is no singular way of doing something, and also how your context changes a lot. I would like to connect that with this idea of different aspects of consciousness existing in our body all the time, and various ways through somatic practices how we learn to access these different states of consciousness. What does that inspire in you, this idea that we are not one singular entity, but there is so many, let's say, possibilities inside of us? And
Yeah.
how do somatics and our body can be a way for us to explore these different states of consciousness?
Well, the word consciousness for me doesn't only mean awareness of being here,
Yeah.
of being awake, awakening from sleep into consciousness, coming out of a coma to consciousness. So consciousness, it's a very, it's kind of mysterious. There's a mystique to consciousness,
Yeah.
because for me, it's about letting go of the central nervous system, the brain,
Right.
and allowing things to come to mind, come to awareness, rather than believing that there's one state of consciousness, that I am awake, therefore I'm conscious, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
We know that's not the case. And what I've learned from babies, from people with nonverbal communication, people with adults at a mental age of 18 months, for example, is that the state of consciousness is actually about presence, being here now in this moment, and that being present is rubbish. Words are rubbish, aren't they? Like if we were to sit in silence, people wouldn't know that we existed because they're listening to our voices.
Right.
But if we were to sit in silence and just be together, we would feel all kinds of resonances back and forth between each other.
Yeah.
Even through a screen, waves of felt sense. I think that there are many people who write about this stuff. I'm trying to do the same, but I think that in order to be in the presence of other, I have to be able to shift my place of awareness, or my level of consciousness, modulate that, be permeable to different states of being in order to meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be, so when we talk about cellular consciousness, that's really about getting into the bodily sense of something, and not in the cortex, not cortical. So that sense of sensing and feeling. So the felt sense of being in my body then varies as to whether I am sensing and feeling myself within my skin, at the skin level, feeling light on my skin, feeling the cloth brushing the hairs on my skin, feeling the weight of my body dropping into the ball through my skin. All of those are different states of consciousness.
Right.
And then if I go to my support structures, my connective tissues, and I go to my bone and I'm feeling suddenly stable, I'm feeling my spine supporting the top of my, and through to the top of my head, and my head balancing on the top of the spine. That's another different state of awareness, of self-support and consciousness. So that's embodiment, isn't it? What we call embodiment, but actually embodiment doesn't make sense. It's about awakening to the body, the cellular level of the tissues of our body. What is bone like? What is muscle like? Muscle moves, bones grow, constantly replenish our blood system with cells. But it's like I can speak about it cognitively, but when I go to that place within myself as I'm breathing or sitting, then even as I'm talking to you, my voice starts to change because I'm feeling something different. Like the tone of my voice drops and becomes quieter if I go to the cells than when I'm in my bone. So that's what I mean about being available. Is, like you say, it's a really good question to tie that into being available. How? Being available by understanding there's much enfolded within us, many possibilities enfolded in us, that we're very, very able to accommodate differences in other people and use the wisdom that we have about our own beings to support others to discover theirs. And again, that's not being, I don't intend to assume I know better than, but it's using that experience, that place of experiencing self, to enable oneself to connect with others who might otherwise not be able to connect to me. The fact that I can adjust my own state of consciousness to meet others where they are is really helpful, because then something magical does happen.
Wow.
Magical because it wouldn't happen without that ability to drop into another place of being and moving, touching.
Mm-hmm. In a way, exploring all the range of the resonances that we have inside of us, which then enables us to tune in to all the other resonances. Because for me, it's always, in the end, going back to this vibrational aspect.
Yeah, very much. Which is very sensory, isn't it? That's what the senses, that's how the senses operate. They pick up vibration of whether it's quality of touch or something moving against you, or whether it's light on the retina or sound on the eardrum. It's all about receiving vibration and sending the signal that generates through our brains, which are the only process. They're just the processing center, but we're actually in the world through our senses, through touch and movement all the time. Yeah. But vibration is really important. I think this is where it's interesting that the somatic field, or the field in which I work, it's not only about the body and or somatic psychology. You know, people try to name it as something, but actually it's very pluralistic, and it's about I feel the generative sense of people like Bohm, who talks about knowledge being enfolded within us, and then it unfolds, and so this sense of the evolving being not being about learning and feeding the brain full of information, but about being alive and being in the world is much more about the fullness of being, and you know, responding to the here and now as fully as possible rather than controlling it from the mind, seeing what's right or wrong, but that sense of allowing and enabling, being with, dwelling, seeing what unfolds, what ripples out, what comes back.
Right.
So it becomes quite eco,
Right.
environmental, as well as, so the substance of our bodies doesn't become just this humanness, but it's actually much more in tune to the world from which we live,
Mm-hmm.
the elements from which we've come from. You know?
Right. I feel in a way it's a deeply feminine approach, feminine in this meaning of tuning in back to this level of us being just beings on Mother Earth, in a communion with everything around us as an intrinsic part of it, and not somebody who is here to control the whole thing, but just one part of a living organism.
Yeah, interesting how we can assign gender to those things, and I think that's rooted in myth, but also nature. The idea of the birth mother, or the birth, you know, the creative, the source of creation and stuff like that, whatever that means for people. But we have to, but there is a but, I think, nowadays, that we have to acknowledge that gender assignment can change. But I suppose, yeah, it helps to classify things, but also to hold the possibility that it can also be changed and be very different. But there are, within the systems of care and holding and caregiving, that there are, I would say, still in this country too, far more women in those roles than men, particularly in the servicing roles,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the top clinical roles and stuff like that. But yeah, that idea of nurturing, enabling, but the eco aspect, the fact of relating to the environment, is also quite literally like the elements, the water, metal, fire, etc., air, and that those qualities inhabit us too, like our breath. The nervous system is kind of electrical, but we have all those elements within us.
Right.
So they're not unknown, and we can then attune to those aspects if we wish to.
Yeah, exactly. The body holds so many mysteries, and to explore it, I feel that we really have to have this wish to do it. That it's not something that unfolds by accident, but it kind of invites a certain curiosity and a certain, let's say, maybe dedication
Yeah,
to discover it, to spend time letting our body reveal ourselves to us.
yeah, saying yes to the body and in bodily experience, because I think when we invite people to do that, it becomes so enlightening for them, I didn't know I had that. I didn't know. It gets repeated. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about myself. You know, I didn't know I had fluid around my cells that brings the oxygen to my cells, and my cells take it through their membrane. And I didn't know that. And now when I breathe really differently, because I know that this air breath becomes a fluid breath, and that fluid breath washes around all my cells. And there's something about a narrative, the story, the body story, the gosh, that brings back memory suddenly. The story of what's within is so incredibly enlightening for people, and the unfolding of those mysteries, as you say, like, oh, it's only a mystery when you become aware that you've got it.
Exactly.
Until that moment, it's not a mystery because you don't know. But when we start to open open to the possibility that, my goodness, there's so much within me that makes sense of everything else that's around me. Oh, if only I knew that, then I'd understand space and time in a different way outside of myself and all the rest. And yeah, and then there are people like, I keep talking about this woman, Maxine Sheets Johnstone, who is got the most amazing mind for things, and she talks about the root of knowing, the root of learning being tactile kinesthetic body, and she talks about the root of morality and the root of all sorts of things is this tactile kinesthetic animate body being. And she's just so right. She's an anthropologist and a mover. She did dance many years ago. So I think this has been going on a long time, this kind of inquisitive sense of unfolding information from the body and going, wow, really? Have I been deluding myself thinking I had to learn Latin in order to understand ancient texts? Like the pedagogic theory and social sciences is really starting to question and bring in the bodily stuff. And then, of course, we suddenly then get these this sudden branding. So we've got neuroscience, whoa, and then we've got affective touch, whoa, and then it's like this mystery suddenly becomes a little bit sensationalized and a commodity. So then the body's becoming this commodity that everyone's kind of selling its wisdom,
right,
on a need to know basis in order for you to be able to handle trauma better, etc. And that's really valid. We do, we can share this information, but it's a bit worrying that it becomes so easy, particularly online, that's becoming quite commodified. And I have to own that, because that's what I teach body mind centering as a vocational training, and that's therefore it's commodifying that knowledge. But then it's a transaction between people in the room and everything else. I just think there just tends to be a little bit of the mind expropriating the body again by going, whoa, neuroscience. And yet I've been to biomedical imaging centers in Manchester where we look at scans and we're showing research. I mean, I'm not doing the biomedical imaging, but they are. And then this guy actually saying, do you know what? Put your hand up if you know you can apply this to a practice. And nobody put their hand up, because all these medical imaging of neurons in the brain firing off, nobody knew how they were ever going to apply that to any practice. It was just the wow factor of doing it. Somebody else has to take that knowledge and do something with it, because they can't.
Yeah. But do you feel that this knowledge will ever be, in a way, given to us as a human species as a whole? I mean, to become just like a part of our lives from since we are born. Do you think we are in a process of going there in the future, Or it will always be like a specialized field where people will just have to, in a way, be interested enough or lucky enough to even discover it.
I think things are changing slowly. I don't know. I don't reckon it's going to be overnight, but there are schools where they teach breath work to the children in school time, and it's not a long time. It might be sit and breathe for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then move on. And it's the way of just settling the mind of the room, as we call it. But that things are changing. Conversations are being had as to how to deal with. I don't mean deal with, how to enable. It's about moving with the times. That these old models just don't seem to work anymore. It doesn't prepare people for life,
Right.
in terms of what society demands of us at the moment. But there is more and more an interdisciplinary thing going on. So coming back to the body within dance or within psychotherapy or within teaching, that I'm seeing that there really is an interest in the developmental process within education, and actually being able to have a bit more sense of each individual child within a group, rather than always examining them and assessing them by their achievements, but being able to hold the child as a whole a bit more as a person. Things like that are changing, but I would really hope that. I mean, it's one idea I thought about, was how to facilitate such a change by making things available, resources available, like on embryology, the story of the body unfolding, and it could be in one of those kind of visual ways, but also through puppets or something. I don't know.
Mm.
But how to make, and it's not to demystify. It's actually to share, because actually kids are very, very curious,
Mm-hmm.
as are adults, to know more about their bodies, particularly when the stresses of day-to-day life is causing such mental distress that they are becoming disassociated, and therefore bringing in the body is really, really important part of their healing and their balancing again. I do hope, because it is imbalanced and there is a mess out there, and a lot of rethinking needing to be done. And I think it's really important that voices of ourselves as practitioners need to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting to get quite politicized, and of course I'm publishing books and stuff like that, but I think it's important to contribute as much as we can to the wider social setup.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this important field of developmental work and embryology, and how that would be useful, that we are introduced to that. Why do you feel this work is so important for us? What does it bring us? What insights?
Well, it's going against the utilitarian way of doing things. So if up till now everyone's had to conform to an educational system in which everybody gets examined by the age of 6 or 10 in order to go into secondary school, and then at the end of secondary school you get examined in order to go to university, and if you don't do that you get on a rubbish heap, or you go to college and do vocational training, or you feel like you failed, but actually you can have a much better life by not going to university and just going in and experiencing and working your way up, like my sister did. So there's just these given pathways, a utilitarian way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
which people conform to, but there are always people who don't conform, who fall by the wayside, and then become sense of stigma or reject or failure or whatever, or not. They do really well, they thrive. But the non-utilitarian way of doing things, much more kind of democratic way of doing things, is to have, as in the Danish system, I think it's still like this. I lived there for 6 years, where there are a lot of free schools. There's a lot of finding the right school, like a good pair of shoes for the kid, so that you go where you feel the school is going to, and the environment mostly is going to be conducive to the ongoing development of the child.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not going to evolve into the banker or the or the doctor, but they can become a doctor at any stage in life. They can train, they can retrain, they can go and do a degree and some A levels and retrain and be a doctor at any age. And that's starting to happen. You know, people are training quite late
Right.
to become a doctor or a nurse or whatever. They don't have to do that through schooling necessarily anymore. And there are other ways in this country where people can join the health service with very basic experience and learn by practicing as an apprentice on the wards, and then they get the qualifications accruing as they go, so they work their way up if they want to, and if not, they just stay at the level that they're happy with. So that's feeding a utilitarian society, but it's providing a much broader scope of access into all different kinds of employment, but ways of living, sort of identities. So that thing of being a doctor isn't beyond my reach. So, and I think the somatic world, because we are embracing individualism, we're embracing each person. I think I went off a bit, sorry, but the developmental stuff, the developmental approach gives a real indication of an individual, a subject, a person, and that we are not all going at the same pace, at the same time, in the same way. And so the fact that we're all unique in our own way is against the utilitarian society and really helps us to manage and to support those people who don't fit in, who don't conform, as well as those who do. So how to support somebody in a time of need, what is missing, what are they lacking, what's not been given to them at a young age. When you notice that someone's lacking self-esteem or someone's because of abuse or a bad experience, and you use a developmental approach as well as trauma, vagal nervous system kind of stuff, you've got a much fuller way of supporting, a much bigger resource for supporting and understanding and helping them to understand themselves and to be more comfortable with themselves than if you just examine them and assess them objectively.
And in a way, it's stepping out of this linear way of thinking where there is just like one achievement after the other.
Yeah.
And just becoming aware that we are in these cycles that are overlapping, and our individualities plays a role how we sail through these cycles.
Yeah.
One of the aspects of your rich work is integrating BMC and somatic work with psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Could you please talk a little bit about that and the importance of this deep somatic work in the process of psychotherapy?
I think it's adding to the range of methods and therefore choice for people. So my way of working with movement and non-verbal forms of language means that it enables me to work with people who can't access verbal talking therapists, and so I find the population that I tend to work with are people who actively choose that they don't want to talk, but still engage cognitively, but not to focus on talking, and to have permission to have other approaches, whether it's going outside for a walk or being indoors and moving in relation to objects or in relationship to me, being witnessed. So it kind of ties back to all the things that we've discussed so far, such as states of consciousness and so on. That very much the mind can often, we talk about veiling, we veil ourselves, our identities become projections or veils, the one or the other, projection or a veil. Either we reveal something about ourselves we want people to see, or we cover up things we don't want people to see, and that can be very relative to certain self-perceptions, but also fear of being a certain way that other people aren't, being different. So I find that working with the body kind of enables people to explore self-perceptions and identities that are very difficult to verbalize. and therefore they get hidden or not revealed or judged, rather. Unfolding, I use the thing of unfolding aspects of self. And I also feel that the corporeal, talk about corporeality, that the realm of the body is generally one that generates a sense of trust and safety, of relational space, a permeable relational space, non-hierarchical or less hierarchical or more reciprocal, because it's not about engaging ideas, and therefore you must be really intelligent to be a psychotherapist. You're going to fix my brain. To let's discover together and explore this stuff, because I'm sure you know so much that isn't being spoken. You know, you, the client, you, the person who's working, and also that you have resources and capacities that maybe you're not accessing because we're focusing on talking. So the sense of what's the purpose of any therapeutic process is to help people who cannot cope on their own to find their own resources to cope better, or to feel into the support that you're offering to regain balance, ease, sense of self, grieve what they need to grieve, to find a resolution for the conflicts that are going on. Whatever it is, it's kind of like a balancing process. And I think the imbalance of body mind can be a problem. If we think that it's all in the mind, then we're forgetting a whole aspect of memory and imprint and knowledge and knowing, self-knowing, that could be very helpful for that person to tap into.
Right.
So the framework is no different. The responsibility for the client, whether it's kind of more analytical approach or a more cognitive approach or a more person-centered, non-verbal approach, I think the responsibility is still the same, that the process has to be centered and focused on supporting the person who's coming to see you in the best way possible, and to safeguard them and to safeguard others who might be trapped in something that's not functioning well. You're very often you're not just dealing with the person, you're dealing with the situation that involves other people. So I do think that the BMC, as I said, just to reiterate, is that sense of corporeality and resonance with the body, and being able to tune to all these different aspects, such as the postural tone, how they're sitting, how they're holding, what is their demeanor? Do they give eye contact? Do they feel comfortable with speaking, talking? Do they talk about problems with parents in the past, and conflicts and clashes with family and stuff like that? And therefore the developmental approach and the experiential anatomy approach, or the body system approach, can be very resourceful. Just to say, where are you holding yourself? You look uncomfortable. Go on my back. I've got pain in my back, and see how to free that up. So I guess if people are bringing a conflict that's very much about certain types of behaving and relating to another person, that's more cognitive and relational. But if it's really about loss or trauma, then you can, I don't think we can work without some kind of effective bodily sense, dealing with the anguish and those deep emotions that are really powerful and very disruptive. There's anger or grief, or those aspects of pain, thresholds and tipping points that are very much indicated through moving, through being, and through tuning to the body in the process of reflecting upon the problem. So I just find this, again, is about being able to accommodate people who might prefer not to have to talk and tell the story one more time.
Right.
That can be re-traumatizing. Or people who want to be in a quiet space and be held, and to talk when they're ready to talk, or to use vibration, like you say, like hearing sound, expressing, dissipating discomfort and unease in lots of different ways. And I think being a touch-based practitioner, I haven't talked so much about touch, but touch is essential to my practice as and when it's agreed. But I think the merging of two people through touch, coming together of one to resonate and listen deeply to someone's body through touch is one of the most effective forms of healing.
Mm.
In many cases that would not happen if it was talking.
Yeah, that was my next question about the touch. In your last book, The Impact of Touch in Dance Movement Psychotherapy, focuses on the role of touch and this nonverbal language. And there's this interesting expression I heard in one of your interviews. You talk about therapeutic holding.
Mm.
When we're working with people who have been through severe trauma. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, touch isn't only going on at the point where the hand touches the body.
Yeah.
And the therapeutic holding has to be maintained through all of that. So whether I'm touching the person or not, that's kind of what I meant about the responsibility or the role of holding the space is still really important. So whether I'm touching them or not, I have to hold the space as the therapist. And that means deeply listening, conversing, keeping the dialogue going, not assuming that this is good for them, and allowing and enabling them to express when they've had enough, etc. So that's this whole consent issue, which is a hot topic in touch. And Don Helen Johnson talks about the intricacies of touch in BMC, but what BMC resources is the cellular qualities of touch and relative to different parts of the body in the developmental process as well. So the embryological states of development are based in cellular states of being, and then organisms, very simple organisms such as sponges. So I talk about the sponging touch in the book, and very often, like using that language with people who do or don't have a good verbal capacity. In my experience, that kind of interaction with the language actually develops their, as in the case in the book, rather than scribble a word or a part of a word just randomly on a page, she started to construct a sentence. And there'll be lots of spelling mistakes, it didn't matter. But she started to want to write. So there was a maturation effect. And that's part of the therapeutic holding, is that you want to enable the people to find and grow and evolve. It's not about standing still or containing only. It's about creating a space in which they're evolving fully as this being that they are, this animate body mind being, wonderful creature, if you like, who may not be feeling that they fit very well in the world at the moment, but by doing this touch and movement and expressive work together, they evolve resources. Hopefully, that's the whole point of it. They don't perish. They thrive and they evolve and become more of who they are. And that's the purpose of the therapeutic holding, is to enable that maturation process when it's possible, and to enable this person to go away feeling that they do know themselves better and are more able to cope,
right,
or make choices and decisions for themselves. So the body doing that developmental process, which is that the natural way of learning and growing, is to be in an experience and to have a dialogue and then feel oneself growing and with resources and information about oneself, which means you cope much better with life. So it's not brain down, it's body up.
Yeah. It's beautiful now when you describe it and you mention again the embryology. And I always, when going into these embryological processes, I always have this feeling of emerging being, which is organically growing. And now you're talking about creating this whole field, therapeutic field space, let's say, where this evolution is possible. I see it like a really fertile ground and land, and like this horizontal space where we just support each other
Yeah.
in evolving. It's a beautiful image, again, for me, very very natural, very ecological in a way.
Mm. Yeah, and always returning to very primal states in order to refind and reconstitute those aspects of self that have faded or been challenged or been broken. And yeah, it's literally like the remembering process of putting the different aspects of self, reconstitute self. That sort of language is helpful, but it's really a regeneration process, or a recuperation or a restoration of self in an environment that is very effective and really focused on you as an individual, not on a generalized process.
Yeah.
Some therapeutic, like CBT, work much better for people who just want answers to questions and to be told what to do next. But when it's deep-seated trouble, problems from way back, or a really deep sense of oneself that's been taken away, then going back to origins is really important, and going back to those primal senses and recreating a safe, nurturing space of being with the empathic resonance and attunement that was of mother infant or caregiver infant, father infant, whatever. Very, very nurturing, very restorative place of being.
In a way, what we usually miss in everyday life, this nurturing, this watering of the places which are for some reason dry or in pain or
Deprived.
Yeah.
And for no fault of our own, very often.
Yeah.
That's the thing, which is why the therapeutic holding doesn't also end with that person in that space. At times you have to do more outside of that and really offer training to people or write reports. So very often my work doesn't finish in the therapy room. I have to write reports to the police or to probation or to mental health workers or consultants, or whatever. There are times when you have to be more engaged with the wider, beyond the membrane of the therapy room, so I talk about the meta membrane, if you like, of society, and the impact of society on deprivation, touch deprivation, the cause of touch deprivation, and how people don't thrive in environments that aren't conducive to them.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the membrane again. Can you elaborate a little bit on this membrane concept?
It represents the therapeutic understanding, if you like, or therapeutic holding. It's a container, but it's not. So each person has their own self membrane. I have mine, my professional self, etc., that I'm bringing to the other, and then the client has theirs. And then as we become more engaged in our process, we then start to share the same kind of membrane space where we're still autonomous, but we're much more kind of resonating of and with each other. And whatever I bring to that space is in order to help the other person, and whatever they bring to me is to help me understand how to be with them. So there's this kind of sense of picking up what information, what manifests bodily, that there's a real sense of focus and attention to each other in that space, which it's my job to nurture that sense of being together in a space, a safe space, so that they can be more fully of themselves with me, leaning into me, being on their own. This kind of dance that goes on. But as soon as we finish, they have to go back to life, to society. So, and there are aspects out there of social discourse, or like the non-touch discourse that's out in society and education settings, in care, where, we're not allowed to touch people, we're not allowed to touch the children because we can be accused of abuse and be litigated against. So
Right.
society is always affecting us and giving us extra information that we can take with us within our membranes, our awareness, that can impact negatively on us as people or on the way we work. So I like to just really feel able to hold that happens, and therefore whatever happens in our therapeutic space can then benefit society if the story can be told, if to change the culture, different narrative is given. So that's the reason why I write, is to impact back into society and say, yes, that may be the case that we need to minimize abuse, but touch isn't the problem, it's the behavior through the touch that's the problem. And what you're doing by eradicating touch is denying the purpose of touch as a means to maintain health and well-being and growth and development. It's all those really positive things. Or the primary purpose of touch is not to cause abuse to anybody.
Exactly.
So it's about, again, a redressing an imbalance. So the membrane theory is a way of saying, okay, so if society holds that rigid membrane of saying a non-touch discourse, how are we going to change it? We have to populate that space with other conversations. We have to bring into that space, the possibility to think differently, or stories that indicate that is not a very good. It's a diktat. It's a diktat. And by being a diktat, it's there because everyone's afraid of litigation and being accused of abuse. But actually, that's creating fear, which is counterproductive because then people are afraid to touch, blah, blah, blah. It just amplifies the problem. So we need to balance that with other conversations and say, wait a minute, you're shooting yourself in the foot because actually you're actually propagating abuse by saying that they shouldn't touch people, because in settings where people are supposed to be cared for, if the care workers are told not to touch them, then they have to touch them to do personal care. And it's in those cases that they start to dislike the person because they're untouchable people. We're not supposed to touch them. And then it becomes the next stage is then to be abusive, to restrain them, to restrict them, to use touch as a way of controlling, for physical contact as a way of controlling people.
Right, in a way distorting something that's in its essence should be our birthright element for healing and nurturing and support, but then taking it and putting it into a different context. And yeah, so I guess all these things are about us reclaiming all these faculties that we have and the strength that's available to us that for some reason some aspects of society are trying to remove. I don't know if that's a conscious choice or not, or just like a series of wrong judgments one after the other.
Yeah, and I also think that it's because touch is taken for granted. We're touching things all the time and we never question it. But as soon as we're in a power relationship with somebody caring for another, and physical contact becomes a way of controlling those situations or abusing people, then touch in that context becomes a big negative conversation, and therefore touch is eradicated. But it's because we've silenced the other conversation, which is that touch is nurturing and needed and necessary in order to reassure people who lack self-resources, who need to have a hand on the back to feel present, who are all the reasons for touching people are forgotten about or considered not to be the job of those people who are caring for them. But if there's nobody else there to care for those people, apart from those guys there who were told not to touch them, then they're going to be touch deprived and they're going to manifest distress, which you're then going to control by restraining them. So it's completely upside down. It's wrong. It's a wrong strategy. And anybody I've trained in touch-based methods, it's completely changed the culture. It's completely changed the culture. So they're no longer afraid of touch because they see it as helpful, not as a conduit for abuse, but, this is really helpful. They really like it when I hold them for 5 minutes when they're crying, to put my hand to give them a wraparound hug. And that's not sexual abuse. That's giving somebody a wraparound hug.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have to, it is about reclaiming what's natural that's been taken away, and to enable them to do their jobs better, because most of them do actually want to do it better. They don't want to be hurting people.
Yeah. Amazing, Ms. Dymoke. Very inspirational.
Call me Katy, Ivan, finally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very respectful. Miss Dymoke makes me feel like I'm in school or something.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Katy. This is really beautiful, and I think, yeah, your voice is very, very much needed. Do you have any particular message for the end?
Just a big thanks for the conversation, and it wasn't so difficult, I suppose, as I imagined it might be. And I really feel that what's being modelled here is the kind of conversation that needs to be happening everywhere as much as possible in order to balance the imbalances and to create a society and a culture that is much more accessible and inclusive of difference. And that seems to be what everybody's asking for. And the best thing about it is it takes skill, but it doesn't necessarily cost money.
Right.
Touching somebody isn't expensive, doesn't cost money. So, these natural resources that we have, the way of going forwards from here, with care and attention.